Employment rate rose to the highest level in 4 years, and the industries most exposed to tariffs, like manufacturing, are shedding jobs.
More than 300 South Korean nationals detained in a U.S. immigration raid are now back home. A special Korean Air chartered flight carried the workers back from the U.S.
What if I told you America's downfall didn't come from a foreign enemy, a devastating war, or even an economic collapse, but from the arrogance of its own leadership? What if the turning point wasn't a missile strike or a stock market crash, but something far stranger, handcuffing the very engineers building America's future? Because that's exactly what just happened. In one shocking week, two of America's closest allies, Canada and South Korea, didn't just walk away. They humiliated the United States in front of the entire world. And the way it unfolded reveals not just a political misstep, but the beginning of a new global order that no one in Washington is ready to face. September 2025. While most Americans were pouring their morning coffee, ICE agents stormed a factory in Georgia. But this wasn't just any raid. They didn't find undocumented laborers or low-wage workers. Instead, they dragged out 316 South Korean engineers, the brightest minds in clean energy and AI, handcuffed and chained like criminals. These weren't disposable contractors. These were the people building a next-generation battery plant that could have put America at the center of the clean energy revolution. Imagine if Vietnamese police raided an Apple plant in Ho Chi Minh City and paraded 400 American engineers through the streets in ankle chains. Washington would call it an act of war. But this time, America did it to itself and to its closest Asian ally. The world was stunned. South Korea's president delivered a blistering speech calling the arrests a betrayal. Conservative Korean newspapers went further, labeling it a merciless humiliation. Polls showed that 70% of South Koreans felt betrayed by America. In Seoul, they weren't asking if America could be trusted again. They were asking why they had trusted America in the first place. And just like that, decades of trust, partnership, and alliance were shattered. But the Korean disaster was only the beginning. While Washington was stumbling through its crisis with Seoul, something even more devastating was happening quietly up north. Canada, long considered America's reliable junior partner, had been preparing its escape plan for years. And in 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney pulled the trigger. Between May 2024 and May 2025, Canada did what nobody thought possible. For the first time in modern history, Canadian exports to the United States collapsed by 10%. Tens of billions of dollars suddenly rerouted. Where did that money go? Straight to Asia, to Japan, to South Korea, and yes, even to China, the very nations Trump was busy insulting and threatening with tariffs. And Carney wasn't just shifting trade. He was striking at the heart of America's energy dominance. For decades, Washington treated Canadian oil as its private lifeline, but the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion changed everything. Overnight, nearly 1 million barrels of Canadian oil per day started flowing west, to Pacific ports bound for Asia. America's private pipeline had become Asia's energy lifeline. Investors around the world saw it instantly. Shares in Asian refiners surged while American markets trembled. The message was clear. Canada no longer needed America's permission or its markets to prosper. Now here's where things turned terrifying for America. The Korean engineers arrested in Georgia weren't just building batteries. They were building the backbone of America's future, artificial intelligence. Think about it. NVIDIA may design the chips that power AI models, self-driving cars, and advanced simulations. But NVIDIA doesn't manufacture a single one. Neither does AMD. The blueprints may come from California, but the factories, the hands, the expertise, they all come from South Korea. By humiliating and deporting South Korea's top engineers, America didn't just lose workers. It pushed away the very people capable of building the future of computing. Korean media described it as America treating their nation like a disposable contractor. Editorials openly compared the U.S. to an unstable, unreliable developing country. For decades, America was the magnet that pulled in the world's best talent. Today, it's the repellent driving them away. And the money followed. Sovereign wealth funds, global capital, private investors, they all saw the same thing. Instability. Why would you invest in a country that arrests the very engineers meant to create jobs? Within weeks, investment that once flowed effortlessly into Silicon Valley began trickling to Seoul, Tokyo, and Toronto. For the first time in decades, America wasn't the place innovators dreamed of going. It was the place they wanted to leave. And this wasn't just about perception. It was about cold, hard cash. Billions shifted out of U.S. markets and into Asia. Startups that once would have set up shop in California were choosing Seoul, Singapore, or even Vancouver. Trump thought he was protecting American jobs. In reality, he hand-delivered the AI revolution to America's competitors. But the economic fallout was only half the story. America's greatest strength for 80 years wasn't just its military or its economy, it was soft power, the trust that allies placed in Washington, the belief that, despite everything, the U.S. was the most stable and reliable partner in the world. That illusion shattered. Brazil watched as America threatened to interfere in their elections. Latin America saw Washington treating allies like pawns. Asia saw engineers in ankle chains. And Canada, America's closest partner, began building a future without them. Carney's government didn't just diversify trade, they weaponized it. Canadian oil and gas companies were told, modernize, adopt green technology, or lose pipeline approvals. Suddenly, Canada wasn't just diversifying away from America. It was using America's tariffs and tantrums to leapfrog into the future. While Washington burned bridges, Ottawa was building them. But the most devastating blow came quietly, buried in currency deals and trade swaps. For the first time in decades, America's dominance of global finance was under attack. Japan and South Korea signed a currency swap deal, bypassing the dollar entirely. Canada and Europe priced energy trades in their own currencies. China expanded its yuan-based agreements across Asia. Every one of these moves chipped away at the foundation of American power. The ability to print money without consequences. The dollar was no longer untouchable, and the more unstable Washington looked, the faster countries sought alternatives. The dollar's decline wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when. History tells us that empires don't collapse in a single day. Rome didn't fall because of one battle. Britain didn't lose its empire because of one colony. They collapsed because they treated allies like enemies until those allies found new partners. That's exactly what's happening now. By humiliating South Korea and pushing away Canada, Washington sent a clear signal. Alliances don't matter. And so, America's allies are doing what allies have always done, finding a future without the empire. The irony? The countries replacing America's leadership aren't rivals like China or Russia. They're friends. Canada, South Korea, Japan, the nations that once trusted America the most. So here's the brutal truth. America isn't just losing jobs or investments. It's losing relevance. For decades, the world needed America. But after this collapse, after this humiliation, the question is no longer whether America is a superpower. The question is whether the world even needs America anymore. Because when the engineers went home to Seoul hailed as heroes, when Canada's oil started flowing east instead of south, when currencies started trading without the dollar, the world gave its answer. And that answer was clear. America's allies have moved on. Empires rarely collapse from foreign invasion. They collapse from arrogance, from betrayal, from treating friends like enemies. And America just made that mistake in real time. The dollar is weakening, the factories are closing, the allies are walking away. And what happens next may shock you, because the future isn't being built in Washington anymore. It's being built in Seoul, in Tokyo, in Ottawa. So the question isn't whether America can recover. It's whether its leaders will even realize what they've lost before it's too late. If you want to know how China is capitalizing on America's collapse, make sure to like this video, drop a comment on which ally you think America will lose next, and subscribe for part 2. Because the world is changing faster than anyone realizes, and you don't want to get left behind.